It's Mr. Carney here. Just going to have a closer look at Anabel's chapter, do a bit of a summary of the key moments and themes. Before we do, let's look at the key details there. Set on Saturday 9th of November 1946, looking a little bit over a year after the conclusion of World War II. But what we do see is that rationing is still affecting the people of Australia, still unable to get basic items like meat, for instance. Hence, Anabel's making a mock stew. What we do get is an alternate view on the happy, attractive girl that we see in Kip's chapter, and also the woman that Stanzi believes has lived a charmed and easy life. Get a very different look into her life. So she's the sole carer for an alcoholic father. The chapter begins and ends with having to put her father to bed, and basically to ensure that he's in a position where he can survive the night. It's really a moment as well where past and present collides. It ties together a number of sort of the loose ends that we've picked up from Kip's and Francis's chapters. The other thing that is happening here is at the outset of the chapter, Anabel is expecting a marriage proposal from Francis. Before I dive too far in, Mr. Simons asked me to add this slide that he made up on intertextuality. So intertextuality is when a writer brings in other texts and embeds them within their own to add further layers of meaning in their writing. We see Kip mentioning King Kong, for instance, in his chapter. So with this, the Women's Weekly is the intertextuality that's happening. It's a magazine that Australian women have used for decades, often for cooking or doing things in the home. So it really reinforces that traditional domestic role of women. And so, if you wanted some key phrasing for your essay, we can see here, Anabel's reliance on the Women's Weekly symbolises her confinement to traditional women's roles of the 1940s. Her domesticity is revealed by her need to cook, clean and care for her alcoholic father rather than pursue her own interests. Here Jordan juxtaposes Charlotte's choice to keep her unplanned baby, which demonstrates a significant difference in women's social mobility in the late 20th century. Can see there discussion of intention behind what the writer's trying to achieve through their use of these literary features, and not just summarising it or repeating the story there. So it's really focusing in on that theme of social mobility for women, and the way that the different chapters and different characters are juxtaposed to demonstrate the way that shifts over the course of these generations. So back to the chapter, what are the key themes and motifs? So the themes, we've got family secrets, we've got alcohol abuse and its impact on families, continuing the theme of social division and social stigmas, and finally disempowerment versus breaking free, and also that whole idea of shame that's tied in with those. We've also got the recurring motifs that we're now seeing. We've got the pendant. Anabel talks about the way it smooths her skin. It has a weight to it. There's something significant about it. Continuing motif of photographs. Kip is a photographer's assistant. There's the photograph of her parents in a much happier phase of their lives. Also further references to hands. See Mr. Crouch's handprint on his glass of beer, indicative of his alcoholism. But we also have attention to Kip's hands when he arrives to sort of separate Mac and Francis at the dance, and the way that they represent his strength and his character. Finally, we have a very old motif that you see in a lot of places when you look closely, or a lot of literature, is the hostile brothers motif. That's often representative of familial conflict, so conflict within families. It's often often seen as one of the drivers, the way that one parent might favour a child within a family, and the way that that leads to bitterness and resentment. We see it goes all the way back in Genesis in the Bible, and it's a repeated theme. I guess it's a bit of a warning of how the way parents treat their children can lead to massive conflict and damage within families. Now, interestingly, it doesn't always lead to bad outcomes. And in this case, what we probably see is Kip's character allows them to move on beyond that. It's a type of restoration that's able to happen as a result, largely of Kip. And we see sort of anything he touches, he's able to bring good out of in a way. And this is one of those, that relationship with Frances, which, at this point in the story could really go in multiple directions. It could either be very damaging for their family. And I think what we also see there is the fact that Kip as a parent doesn't allow this to happen. Charlotte and Stanzi comment on how much of a loving father he is. So even his treatment by his own mother and the way that affects his relationships, he stops that from becoming a generational problem. Okay, so what do we learn about Kip in this chapter? Anabel's father doesn't trust Kip. We don't know exactly why, but this could be a further reference to this layabout reputation that he gained earlier in the storyline. We find out he's not as handsome as Frances. She comments on account of basically a bent nose, and again, that may be from when the boys punched him in the alleyway earlier on. At this point in the storyline, after he's left the army, he's now a photographer's assistant at the Argus, which is one of Melbourne's main newspapers. And he's very much now a man. He's filled out and broadened, those hands as big as Max, just as strong. He has a presence to him, and what we see is he's really comfortable in a range of social situations. He can handle Mac and his friends. He can handle his brother. He can handle this difficult situation with Anabel when Frances storms off. And so he's, again, this idea of the one brother being very competent and the other brother not. That's a part of that hostile brothers motif. Frances, her father describes him as harmless. She says he's different from other Richmond blokes, stands straighter, holds his mouth firmer. Again, this desire to present himself as being above where he comes from. He's a clerk in a law office, but we also find out that he's really socially quite clueless. He does not have that competence in social situations that Kip does. He's banging on the door when he first arrives. Where were you? Never mind. He doesn't even wait for a response. He's only focused on himself. And so, we see this obsession with him being respectable. He can't sit still. Now, we know why that is. He's very ashamed of his actions in his own chapter, and that causes him to make this decision that he has to live this respectable life. But he clearly doesn't show his real self to other people. And Anabel has this perception of Frances that he's way above her, that you could drive a car between me and him. We sort of see this theme of making assumptions about others. She sees him as being morally above her, and she could never keep up with him. And it sort of mirrors the way that the daughters think about Anabel when she's older. The family secret. So it's the first time we get some clearer information about Connie's death. I'll come back to that. We also have Mr. Crouch's alcoholism. What we learn, again, it's alcoholism doesn't, it has its reasons here. We find out that her mother died giving birth to her, and so the way that alcohol can be used to treat trauma, often with negative effects for everyone else. He even says here, I always knew everyone talked about my father and me, thinking their horrible little thoughts. So in their world, there's this, you sort of know, but you sort of don't. You pretend that you don't know the truth about others, and then you gossip behind their backs. The other family secret is this strange love triangle, the Kip Francis Anabel thing, and it's kind of a miracle that when we see them as older people, that they very much get on. And again, do we credit this to Kip and his character? But, clearly they've had to learn to come to terms with that secret, and they've decided never to share it with their children. We also get the story about the pendant. Interestingly, it's sort of when it's handed over, or when it's found out that there's Francis wasn't telling the truth, it's kind of loses its value. But then Kip's sort of able to redeem its value by purchasing it. He gives it, he returns its value too, and it sort of could be seen as then, Kip also redeems Anabel by marrying her. He gives her a life maybe that she was never going to get. We sort of wonder too, why was Francis lurking around? Was he trying to prey? She comes across as quite vulnerable, Anabel, and it leads us to wonder whether Francis, out of his own shame, has sort of decided, well, she's the only girl I have a chance of getting. So, he preys on her vulnerability, not in a really nasty, cruel way, but he clearly doesn't treat her like an equal. He sees himself as better than her. Continue with the whole social vision and social stigma. So again, I covered a bit of this. I'll go over it quite quickly. So there's a climate of division and suspicion that's been created through rationing. The father tells her to close the curtain, lest people think that they've come across this food in a not so good way. We see that gender division with this idea that the women didn't get to keep this. It's not quite equality, but they'd made some improvements in their gender roles, yet that was taken away from them when the men returned from the war. Going a bit further now, we see that the value of reputation and the importance of it in 1930s and 40s Australia. And her friends consider it basically social suicide that she should wear this pendant without being engaged to Francis. One of them says perhaps you shouldn't let that pendant become common knowledge. So there's this really continuation of these really strict social rules about how men and women should interact. We see further on, it says, when couples are out together, the man walks in front and there's no touching. And I think there's some reference that this would be different in Europe. So Australia, deeply, deeply conservative, has very strict ways that men and women should interact. And so again, this reflects on the gender roles and the gender norms that women had to adhere to at this time. We learn the details about Connie's death, and then there was an inquest. Again, this thing that rumours and gossip make their way around. Half of Melbourne knew why Kip took his time to sign up. And Anabel's really surprised that Kip's quite open. I can't believe Kip talked about the inquest in mixed company. Again, this reference to behaviour in public settings and how it's very rigid. So there's sort of these clear social stigmas. And again, even around her father's drinking. And she even makes the comment, no boy had ever called for me. And it's tied to that stigma. And so that's connecting back to my idea there about why Francis is hanging around, because it's sort of it's put Anabel in this position where she's undesirable, even though, when we saw her in Kip's chapter, she was immensely desirable. She was the girl every boy wanted. So we see the impact of social stigmas on her. Now, further continuing that theme of alcoholism, we see how much damage it's done to her father's life. He was a handsome man. Her parents were deeply in love. the next thing, she's recounting a story of finding him passed out on the floor, gasping and gagging, trail of dark liquid running from his mouth. She also mentions him trying to fight her, or way she's got to struggle to move him into bed and ensure that he's safe. And how there's varying levels of that every day. It is a struggle every day in her life. But he's aware. He still indicates a sense of shame to her. And so we see both in Anabel and her father and in Frances different examples of this, of how shame stops people from being their true selves with others. Even towards the end, when Francis is throwing his little tantrum, she goes, "This is the drink talking." And there's this subtle reference to the way that alcohol affects people and their behaviour. And obviously this is a clear link with Tom Westaway of the impact of alcoholic fathers on families and what it can do to them. The impacts, the way it can damage people and their relationships. Just lastly, we get that this theme of disempowerment and shame, and really poor Anabel sees no way out of her situation, and sort of hopes and wishes at the end that her father will die sooner, not later, because of the way that it's really had an impact on her life. She says, in terms of the pendant, nothing like this could ever belong to me. She doesn't feel she's worthy of being given gifts like that. So caring for her father has cost her the ability to interact and even develop friends. She can't find the words to say to Joss and the other friend, on the same page, I don't know what to say, or I can't find the words to answer. One of those in relation to having friends over, the other one in relation to an outfit. And her friends, are they really friends? We could wonder. There's sort of this nastiness underneath, but she can't even pick that up because she's never had this opportunity to develop that knowledge. Now, it's really interesting that unlike others, Kip doesn't seem to feel shame. When talking about the inquest, we hear he looks Joss square in the face while Francis is turning pink. He's willing to confront the truth. He's not worried about whose company he's in or how he's going to be perceived. And I think I mentioned in my last video, this ability to be truthful with oneself and others seems to be what elevates Kip and allows him to live this very satisfying life, and a life where he has some wonderful relationships and he has a wonderful impact on so many people around him. And it seems to be coming down to his character, and he's not bound up by these social stigmas that his world involves. Okay, so we'll leave it there. Hopefully that's helped you to better understand the chapter, just to see some of those key things that are coming through.